What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of The Progenitor. This is the podcast where we go over a director's entire filmography, talking about themes, scenes, shots, pacing, and give a brief review, all within 30 minutes. So let's get started. We are starting our next director's filmography. As you guys remember, we just finished Ridley Scott. We did a conclusion, and of course, Napoleon will be coming out November of 2023, and Gladiator 2 will be coming out after that. So we will go back to him just to review those two films. But for now, we are moving on. We gotta move forward, guys. So next up, we have I believe one of the most polarizing directors working today. But to me, he's one of my favorites, and the main reason for that is he's just such a visual stylist. And okay, I'll admit it, the stories are not always up to par, but what he does in his visuals always elevates certain things. So maybe there's some things missing in the narrative, but visually there's a lot more being said. And what I love about it is he's able to make such iconographic shots that just stand out above anybody else's. We are going to be going over Zack Snyder. Yes, the director of films like 300, Watchmen, the progenitor of the DCEU with Man of Steel, and ending with Zack Snyder's Justice League. And yes, we are not going over Justice League, the Whedon cut. We will be doing the 4-hour and some odd change Zack Snyder Justice League, and we will be going through his entire filmography. Let's start with the very first directorial debut of Zack Snyder, and that would be Dawn of the Dead. So this is a remake of the 1980s Dawn of the Dead by George Romero, and basically I'll give you a quick plot description. A group of, I believe, 7 or 8 main characters are escaping from a zombie apocalypse. And these aren't just ordinary zombies, these are the fast ones. You remember 28 Days Later? I don't know which one came out first, but all of a sudden zombies are no longer lumbering, slow, brainless zombies. They're fast, they're just moving, and they can smell your meat and your blood, and they're going to get it one way or another. So these 5 or 6, and they become 7 to 8, they find their way to a mall. And you know, being a child of the 90s and 2000s, malls were the rage. You know, that's where you go to cool down, that's where you go to shop, hang out, eat. So they're there, and they pretty much have everything there to survive. They just need to wait it out, you know. But slowly they find out that this isn't the way to live. They have another friend across the street that they want to get to, save, and then make it to safety, wherever safety is. Along the way, there's betrayals, there's a lot of people turning into zombies that are part of the 7 or 8, and there's even a mid-credit scene where it kind of shows maybe they didn't make it, guys. So let me get into a really quick review, and this kind of goes back into the history of when I saw the film. So this movie came out around 2004, and I saw it with my friends that were all going to college together, and we were going to go to Baylor, and this is kind of like that movie leading up to going to college. So I saw it, and at the time, I wasn't a huge fan of zombies, and I wasn't a huge fan of gore. So horror was kind of out of my purview, because I also don't like jump scares. So when I first saw it, it wasn't appealing to me. There's a lot of gore, there's the zombie baby, and I was like, what the this is weird. And this isn't even the weirdest zombie thing Zack Snyder comes up with. We'll get into that in future episodes. But pretty much I was kind of not into it. But leading up to this recording of this episode, I rewatched it and I realized how fun it actually is. The cast is overall great. Ving Rhames, and we'll get into all the cast. But overall, just the shots are awesome. The movie is full of energy. The cast is pretty good. My only critique is the characters aren't very deep. And I mean, the main characters like Anna and Michael, they're pretty deep. But there's like a character named CJ. He's the head of security at this mall. He kind of has a 180 turn that kind of comes from nowhere. And even though I like the turn and I learned to like the character, it's a little too quick for me. On top of that, you just have this eclectic group of people, and at first, they're butting heads, but at the end of the day, they know they have to come together. So that's always fun when you have that group dynamic where not everyone is on the same page, but they have to or they're going to die. So pretty much, I really enjoyed this film the second time around. And like we did with Ridley Scott, I'm going to do it again. We're going to do a ranking of all the films. Let's just get into the nitty-gritty in terms of cast and crew. So this is Zack Snyder's directorial debut, so technically he doesn't have any collabs. He directed this film. The screenwriter is a very interesting choice. It was James Gunn, the guy who wrote, directed Guardians of the Galaxy, Super, Slither. He's just all over the place in genre, and he's good at it. And on top of that, he just became co-CEO of DCU. He took the reins from Zack Snyder and is now recreating the DCU in his image. On top of that, the original writer was George A. Romero. If you guys have never seen Night of the Living Dead or any of his other zombie movies, I should watch his Dawn of the Dead because this is a remake, but I really want to see it because this one is pretty fun. And if his Dawn of the Dead is anywhere near this, it's probably a masterpiece. Because his Night of the Living Dead was one of the greatest horror films I've ever seen. And his Land of the Dead is really fun too, where there becomes like a hierarchy of zombies. I think that was really, really dope. Now, as for the rest of the crew, it doesn't seem like Zack Snyder works with them that much again, but I'll just go through it really quick. Cinematographer is Matthew F. Leonetti. Now, I'm looking at his filmography right now. Some of the ones that stand out to me are Strange Days by Catherine Bigelow, Too Fast, Too Furious, and even the original Poltergeist. And the original Poltergeist by Tobe Hooper. So that's a really, really fun horror film. And that's one of those films I had to rewatch and just like man up and get over my fears, right? Next up, you got the editor, Niven Howie. Films that stand out with him are Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. I think that one is the one that I like the most. He's done a lot of Resident Evils, and he's even done God's End, which to me is one of Robert De Niro's worst movies. But Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels is probably the closest in terms of energy to the editing in this movie. So there you have that. And you got Tyler Bates. He's the composer. He will become a frequent collaborator in terms of music. And, we've got a bit of synths, heavy beats. He's a very modern composer. He does return. And the other films for Zack Snyder that he composes are very, very strong. Next up, you have the production designer, and his name is Andrew Nescaramni. Now, looking at this is fun. Okay, so he did Pacific Rim, and I'll stand up for that one. Pacific Rim is one of the most fun kaiju massive robot movies. And if you've never seen it on the big screen, I saw it on the big screen in the theaters. What a ride. That is a good movie. Visual effects. The reason why I bring up visual effects is because a lot of what Zack Snyder does requires these amazing visual effects, and that comes out more with the comic book movies in the future. but there are some visual effects in this film. I have Dennis Berardi, Eric J. Robertson, and Aaron Weintraub, but for some reason I can't really find any of their work. Oh, here we go. Okay, let's do Dennis Berardi. Fight Club. And he's worked with a bunch of Guillermo del Toro movies as well, which is really cool. Crimson Peak, great one. I think the closest to this film would have to be The History of Violence and even The Cell by Tarsem. And it's interesting because I heard a recent interview with Zack Snyder saying that he was actually in film school at the Art Center of Pasadena with Tarsem. So you can kind of get an idea of how visual these directors are, coming from the same school. And then the other guy is Eric J. Robertson. His movies are a little more down to earth. I think the most close to this one would probably something along the lines of, he did Resident Evil, but The Brave One. Now that's an interesting one with Jodie Foster, where she's kind of like a vigilante. It's got that darkness to it, and a lot of, killing. So I'm sure that's there. And then the final guy, Aaron Weintraub. Now this is interesting. A History of Violence is with two of them. So that might be how they do the brutality of the gore and the violence, because that's what those movies are all about. A History of Violence and Eastern Promises by Cronenberg. Visual effects, they got to go deep with the blood and the gore. And there's this shot of Viggo Mortensen, right? He grabs the gun and shoots the guy in the face. Oh man, what a great History of Violence. Okay, anyways, we got choreography. This guy comes back for sure, Damon Caro, and we'll talk about him a little more in 300, which he choreographed as well. And then finally, of course, you have the costume designers. Now, I'm not sure if these guys return per se, but I do know that costume design for Zack Snyder becomes very important in later films. And, we're going to get into it, but the iconography of superhero movies, in terms of Dawn of the Dead, you got a cop, you've got people in t-shirts, you got people in security guard outfits, and then you got skimpy dressed ladies. And on top of that, you got zombies, right? So you got to be very eclectic with the costumes. In terms of cast, we have Sarah Polley, Ving Rhames, Jake Weber, Mekhi Phifer, Ty Burrell, Michael Kelly, Matt Frewer, and Lindy Booth. And it's a wide range of character actors, and they hold up really well with each other. And I like the sweet little romance that Sarah Polley and Jake Weber have. I like how Ving Rhames becomes friends with the guy across the way who's a sharpshooter and owns a gun store. His name is Andy, and they have like kind of this bromance, and there's this really sad but cool subplot on how they're trying to save Andy and get him ready to be evacuated. But unfortunately, zombies get into his hideout and he gets bitten, and Ving Rhames has to do away with the guy. On top of that, though, you have Michael Kelly. So Michael Kelly will return. But the thing with Michael Kelly's character is he's probably the only character that I'm kind of like, it didn't work for me as well, because I mentioned this before, he does a 180 in character from being a dick to, okay, you know what, I'm going to help you guys out because I want to survive, right? The whole time he wants to survive and he's a selfish prick. And then 180 into a nice guy. It didn't really work for me, but that's a mild dislike. On top of that, like I mentioned, Mekhi Phifer's in the movie. He plays like this kind of hoodish gangster kind of guy, but he's got the heart of gold. He has a wife. He wants to change his lifestyle, his ways, and his wife is pregnant. Little does he know, she got scratched, and then all of a sudden, she's going into labor, and then he realizes she has been scratched by a zombie. And now at the last minute they have the baby, and it's a zombie baby. Freaking crazy weird. And Ty Burrell, the guy from Modern Family, the father, plays one of the biggest dicks in this movie, and he gets his comeuppance, so don't worry about that. So like I mentioned before, Zack Snyder collaborations. This is his first film or directorial debut of a feature film, so there's no collaborations, but like I mentioned before, they're coming. Now, let's go to some themes that really stand out to me. And I think one of the major things that I realize is the few versus the many. And this is going to come up a lot more, but basically you have like these 7 or 8 people, and they're versus a world of zombies. And you know, there's probably other areas where there's remote crews of humans that are still escaping. But at the end of the day, this movie is based on these 8 guys in a mall, and they just have to survive, right? So the few versus the many. Next up, empowered female characters. Ding, ding, ding. This is more with the Sarah Polley character. She's a nurse who gets stuck with these people, and she does her best to help out. She's one of the strongest characters in it, and she's trying to give everyone hope, pretty much. And she's a wonderful character, and great performance by Sarah Polley. Nature space is a hostile and uncontrollable environment. Yes. Basically, they're in a normal area and they get stuck in a mall, and everywhere they go is hostile and uncontrollable because zombies can be found anywhere in this environment. So I'm going to give it a ding ding ding. The only way to survive is to adapt. Yep. They have to come up with plans to get out of this situation. And they have to come up with plans to get around the zombies and adapt to their environment, so they understand the zombies and they know how to work around them. So that's really interesting. And I don't know if you guys could tell, but those last 3, they're pretty much in line with Ridley Scott. So that's kind of why I wanted to do these guys together, because they have similar themes going on, and they're just both such visually strong directors. Next up, violence don't solve a thing, brains do. In this case, violence does solve a thing by blowing the zombies' brains out, but at the same time, it's the planning and the adapting that'll get them away from the zombies and into the water, and you know, they're just trying to get away so that they can find other humans to team up with. So yeah. Money corrupts. The only reason why I'm bringing this up is because Ty Burrell's character is kind of like this rich asshole, and he's trying to do everything he can to just get back to his boat, fill it up, and get away from all these other guys. He doesn't want anything to do with them, really, but he knows the only way to get to his boat is through teaming up with these people. So he's a selfish asshole. Sacrificing oneself for the greater good. Yeah, that's a big one, because what happens is Jake Weber's character, Michael, during the movie, he gets, at the very end actually, I forgot if he was bitten or scratched. I think he was bitten, but he decides to stay behind, and he sacrifices himself by blowing up the dock so that the zombies can't get to the remaining survivors, pretty much. Inspire people out of their apathy. Again, this is a huge thing with Michael. Like, he's just a normal dude, but he inspires Kenneth, the character Ving Rhames plays, and he inspires the other team, and he works with Anna to inspire everyone to say, listen, the only way we're going to make it through this is if we work together. And then teamwork only gets you so far. There's always going to be that one guy, that standout guy, which would of course be Michael, who sacrifices his life. Or even Kenneth. You know, he can make it on his own, but he decides to stay around, and he realizes that he can do better with a team. So actually, I don't know. Sacrificing is for sure, but teamwork only gets you far. I'm going to take that out. The rise of a hero starts with struggle and tragedy. Yep, throughout everything I just said, Kenneth, he lost. Actually, I don't remember what happened to Kenneth, but I keep going back to Michael, CJ, and Anna. Anna lost her boyfriend. CJ lost one of his security deputies. And these guys, from there, they see this happening, this evil happening, and they realize they have to stand up, The human form is perfect. Okay, and this one, not so much in this movie. This one will come a little more into 300 and the rest of the superhero ones. You can run, but you cannot hide forever. Hey, that's exactly what zombie movies are all about. You can run, but you're not going to get away, especially when these zombies can freaking book it. Okay? So you got to be careful. Now, next up, my favorite part, we're going to talk about some freaking awesome scenes. Now, I'm going to start with, at 6 minutes and 50 seconds, there's this really cool overhead bathroom shot as Sarah Pauli's character, she just closed the door and she gets knocked back into the bathtub. But it's a shot from above, and it's such a cool shot. Next up, she's driving. She just left her house. She's driving, and there's kind of like this cool panning shot of zombies chasing neighbors, and it's at about 8 minutes and 23 seconds, and it sort of reminds me of that shot from The Duelist, like the very last shot when Harvey Keitel's character is just watching over the cliffside because he knows everything's over. And it's kind of the same. Like, she's driving away and she realizes everything's over because zombies have taken over. Okay, next up, an hour, 7 minutes and 57 seconds, Ving Rhames is reloading his shotgun in slow motion. An hour, 28 minutes and 34 seconds, Ving Rhames, he blows a zombie's head clean off. And then an hour, 29 minutes and 53 seconds, Ving Rhames blows Andy's zombie head off. So those are kind of my favorite shots, and a lot of the things, it's not just thematic story themes that he carries on in his films. It's also visual motifs, visual themes. Number one, desaturated lighting, like everything's a little grayer, and this kind of equates to Ridley Scott in his later years, you know what I mean, when he's working with Darius Wolski, everything's just a little grayer, a little colder. But yeah, Zack Snyder likes this colder palette, and it kind of shows in every single one of his movies. Even when we get into 300 or Watchmen's a colorful comic book, right? But in this case, Zack Snyder likes these grays, not the super pastel, colorful. He likes this desaturated look. Next up, he likes speed ramping. He likes the slow-mo. He likes the fast, like move things faster. It's just very interesting because when you watch his films, you can automatically sort of pick out his stylistic touches, and I really like that about him. And what else is there? He always has these really interesting trick shots, and other than that, I think those are the main two things that you can just lock in on. But once we get into a little more of the superhero movies, we can talk a little more about the visual effects and the human form and a lot more things that he's visually obsessed with, and I think that makes it a lot more interesting. But yeah, so that is Dawn of the Dead, his first directorial feature-length debut, and honestly, it's a fun watch, and I definitely recommend it. Is it on the top of the list, in the top of Zack Snyder's filmography? That's still to be scene, because we got 10 films to get through. Almost 11. Well, almost 10 actually. Because we're taking out Justice League, the Joss Whedon version. So overall he has 9 films. And then in December of 2023, this year, he's going to have Rebel Moon. So I think it's just going to be a really fun ride. We're going to see him go through different genres. We're going to see him return to the zombie movies. We're going to see him get into animation. We're going to see him go into female empowerment films and his superhero epics. And so, you know, I kind of wish that he would sort of get out of these genres and try to do something a little more straightforward, a little more modern and normal, maybe like a smaller indie style film. But hey, Zack Snyder, you do you, man. So let's talk about what's coming up next. Next up is his first foray into comic books. This is his second film, and he works with a great cast with some unknowns at the time, but now they are stars. And he's going back into ancient Greece. And not only that, it's his first foray into comic books. I probably mentioned that. And he's starting with one of the greatest writers there is, Frank Miller. Yep, you guys got it. Next up is Zack Snyder's 300. So I can't wait for you guys to see it again, rewatch it, but check it out. For me, I have it on Blu-ray. I even have the digital copy, but unfortunately, you're probably gonna have to buy it or rent it. I don't see it streaming. Oh, you know what? It might actually be on Max. Last time I checked, it was on Max, but I'll be honest, I definitely would recommend you getting the Blu-ray, because checking out the making of or the commentaries of a Zack Snyder film, it's always really interesting. And when we get closer to Watchmen and Man of Steel, that's where these making ofs and these video commentaries get really interesting, because Zack Snyder, you know, he goes all out with them. So, alright guys, thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you soon. Next up, we're going to be doing 300, so check it out wherever you can. Last time I checked, it was on HBO. It's not even HBO Max anymore, it's Max. Sorry guys, I took a bit of a hiatus, you know, and I'm all discombobbled, but I'm glad to be back and that we're able to talk about the films of Zack Snyder. So, talk to you guys soon. Bye.